Oregon and Washington are headed to the Big Ten, and there seems to be a narrative with these Pac 12 teams joining the Big Ten that since they're coming from the West Coast, they're soft. And the Big Ten, they're going to beat up on them. They're going to get beat down by Michigan and Ohio State and Penn State. So, you being the Big Ten expert, covering the Big Ten pretty closely, what are your initial thoughts on Oregon and Washington and how you feel they're going to fit in into the Big Ten?
Well, for one, what's going to be interesting is how are the home and home series going to go? Because the Big Ten and the Pac 12 have a history of performing poorly in each other's country. So now that Washington, Oregon, USC, and UCLA are, they're here in the Big Ten, how does that work? What I think is all four of the teams, minus maybe UCLA, who are joining, they're going to be in the upper. They're going to be in the upper half, the upper 9 teams of the conference. I'd say USC, Washington, Oregon, with the way they're developing, and especially with the way that Oregon and USC are recruiting, they could contend for the conference every year from a recruiting standpoint. And I think that 2024, it might be Michigan, OSU, Penn State in any order in the top 3. And then the next 3 teams are Washington, Oregon, USC. That's probably what I think will happen. So you're getting high-level, top-tier teams, in my opinion. And if you're a fan of a Big Ten fan not named Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, this sucks because now your chances of getting to Indy are infinitesimally smaller. They're tiny. But I think that while Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State will, for the foreseeable future, dominate the conference, and in some instances rough these schools up and beat them to death, they can't win every year. That can't happen. Even with Nick Saban in Alabama, LSU, Florida, Georgia, even Auburn, they found ways to win. And I expect Oregon, Washington, especially USC with Lincoln Riley, to do something like that. That's just my brief thoughts there.
And we already saw what happened the last time Oregon and Ohio State got together, man. It was a bloodshed on that field. Oregon was the more physical team, the more dominant team. And I think that these Pac-12 schools have an unfair stigma about them. They're West Coast boys, so they're a little soft. They're afraid to get down and dirty in the trenches. But I don't really think that's true. You look at Oregon, and you think about what they did when they had Mario Cristobal as their head coach, and with Dan Lanning at the helm, their recruiting is still very good. Washington, we saw what they did to Michigan State, absolutely annihilated them. It was an embarrassment on Michigan State's behalf, kind of a disgrace to the Big Ten. So you look at how they're going to fare in the Big Ten, I expect them to come in and be competing right away. Now, of course, you're going to have USC in there. I don't really know about UCLA, but they do have Dante Moore, so they're going to be really interesting, and they do use the transfer portal pretty well. But Oregon and Washington are recruiting really high right now, and I think that they possibly pose a really big threat to Michigan in particular. Ohio State, I think they're great because they recruit at an elite level every single year, but Michigan is one of those teams that they recruit well, they don't recruit at an elite level consistently. I'm not saying they don't recruit at an elite level, but it's not consistent. Some years they'll have a top 10 class, maybe outside looking in top 5 class, and then a couple of years they'll have like some top 15, maybe an outside looking in top 10 class. So you don't really get a lot of consistent elite recruiting out of Michigan, but they do a really good job recruiting up front. But Oregon, with Dan Lanning at the helm, he's a recruiting monster. Kellen DeBoer, he does a really good job recruiting. I think there's a chance that Michigan could find themselves kind of a little bit, out of the loop in things for the next couple of years after this year. When you look at how the trajectory of these two programs is trending up, they can find elite talent They got a lot of money to spend when it comes to NIL, especially Oregon, with the fact that, they have that rich who's the dude? Phil Knight, I believe. Yeah, Phil Knight, the dude
Yeah.
who's like the CEO of Nike or something like that. So, money ain't a problem for them. And they both got really good fan bases. So I think that the home games are going to be really interesting. I'm really looking forward to seeing Penn State versus Washington and Oregon, because these are two programs that kind of are on the fringes of really breaking out back into the national scene. Both Washington and Oregon have been to the college football playoffs in the past, and I think that people kind of overlook that. People seem to forget that Washington and Oregon have had really productive seasons over the last decade, especially when it comes to their ability to compete on the national scene. And I think that both of these two squads should do a really good job in the Big Ten. I expect them to be on the upper echelon of the conference, like you say. I don't think Michigan is going to become irrelevant just because they have a certain mentality about them. But I do think that there is a chance that Michigan's dominance or their grasp on the Big Ten may not be as strong as what it is now once these two teams end up entering the conference. But I want to talk about this, man.